knowing that she had this kind of reputation to uphold. Because when she started, back in the days of Iggy's House and Margaret, she had nothing to lose. She was an unknown who was just trying to do her best. But flash forward 8 or 9 years, and she sold millions of books, and she's a hero to children, and now she's gonna scandalize their moms. And that took some real intestinal fortitude.
The library was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
I don't know if they told you or if you're aware, but I recorded Mark's book in audio. All how many pages?
It's not quite 400, because 400 sounds scary. 398 or so, yes. And I was saying...
A week
of your life.
Worth, yeah.
A week of your life. And I was saying backstage to you, and people should know that people have come up to me at my signings and said, I'm not going to buy the book because I've already heard the audiobook, but it was so brilliantly done that I wanted to meet the author.
Oh.
So that's been an honor for me to hear.
So apparently I did my job.
Yep.
So I think that a lot of people would be curious to know how you, for this book, for the life of Judy Blume, which had not been done so far.
Yeah.
And Judy is 88 years old, and her books, I'm sure her books were meaningful to a lot of you. They were incredibly meaningful to me, still are. I feel like they sort of taught me how to be a woman. Really, how to be a person in this world. They taught me things that, that my parents didn't, I have great parents, but they didn't feel comfortable talking about a lot of the stuff that Judy put in her books. So how did you come to this project?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, that I completely share that sense, which is that I too had great parents who were not uncomfortable with these topics. If I'd asked them about any of them, they would have told me. But I got to these books first before I had the questions that I would have brought to my parents. So there was a lot that I knew already by the time I got to an age where I would have wanted to ask my mom and dad. And the answer is that Judy asked me to do it. But that's the short story. The longer story is that when I was 23 years old and I was a fledgling freelance writer, and I was a fledgling freelance writer because I had realized that I wasn't going to be an actor. I realized I wasn't that good. No, this is true. I got to college having been the actor at my high school, and then I went to a college where there were a lot of really good actors, and I did a number of plays and had I didn't have a lot of wisdom at 18 or 19, but I knew that I wasn't as good as the people I was on. I was good enough to be cast with them, but not good enough to carry the show the way that some of them did. And so I had to kind of figure out, I knew I wanted to do something creative with my life, and I had to figure out what that was. And junior year, I happened into a class on writing and realized, okay, this is something I love and can do. And so I graduated, but I didn't have any sense of myself. I didn't have any connections. I didn't have any portfolio. I didn't have anything. And of course, along the way, they tell you, write what you know. And one day I literally sat down at my old Apple IIe, if you remember those, with the floppy disk drive, and I thought, I'm gonna write about something I know. And I was thinking, I love Judy Blume. As a 9, 10, 11-year-old, I had just reread her books again and again and again. And so I wrote this essay about what she had meant to me as a kid, and I printed it out on an old dot matrix printer, and put it, this is just like a trip down memory lane, right? Then I put it in the mail. My kids don't understand any of this. The translation that has to go on my children is just, at every step I have to explain with a stamp, and sent it to the only place I thought that might publish it, which was the New York Times Book Review. And then a month later got a letter back that said, we like it, we'd like to publish it, we have some edits for you, what's your fax number? So then I had to go find a fax machine at some friend's place or whatever, and it ended up getting published. And this was my first freelance piece. And she read it and she liked it. And so then we ended up having a kind of very occasional correspondence that quickly moved to email. This is the late 90s. And then every 5 years or so, we would be in touch. But that was it. And about 15 years ago, I wrote to her and said, I've had a career as a writer. What if I were to write your biography? And she said, well, I'm not old enough for a biography. And I realized I had offended her because I'd written to a 71-year-old or whatever and said, may I write your biography? And she felt like, well, I have 20 or 30 years left. And I'm getting to the age where I was like, I understand exactly how she felt. And so then I've tried to very delicately every 5 years or so send a very delicate email saying, might you now want to talk about a biography? And then at a certain point in the early 2020s, I just sort of dropped it. Or maybe my wife said, drop it. And I did. But then in the summer of 2022, I got an email from her, and we were sort of still a bit in the depths of COVID, and I think she was thinking about her legacy, and she said, maybe it's time to talk about this biography. So at that point, I went to meet her and her third husband, George. I say third husband, they've been together 40 years, but he's very much her partner in life and in everything. And we agreed that if I wrote the book, she would grant me interviews. So that's how it happened.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
When you did start talking to her seriously about doing the biography, how much did you talk? I mean, I know from reading the book, you have included a lot of her own writing because she was thinking about doing her autobiography for a while, and she granted you the permission to use her notes. Mm-hmm. And I love that. I love that you included her own writing, in this book about her. But how long did that process take?
Yeah, so, I mean, I know I'm talking to a fellow writer because you're asking process questions, which are really, I think, among the most interesting stuff. And so it was a process of interviewing her multiple times. I would say the research was about 18 to 24 months. As I said, it was sort of COVID, and I was able to set aside so much else and devote my time to this. So I did end up interviewing over 100 people, but her more than anyone else. And there were interviews at her home in Key West, interviews at her home in New York City, a lot of emails back and forth, a lot of texts, a lot of phone calls. There was a period of time where we had an hour set aside every week where I would just ask her stuff. And of course, eventually I kind of knew more and more, and the questions got more and more specific. At the very beginning, it was, tell me about high school. And by the end, it was, now in 1978, did you and George have dinner at this restaurant in the Village or in this, at this restaurant? And so it got more and more specific. And the other thing that happened was that as I began to talk to her old friends, and her two best friends from high school, as you know, are still alive and crucial sources for this book, they were telling me stories that then I had to check against Judy's memories. And I know how bad my memory is at 51. Her memory actually is splendid at 88. But even so, people remember things differently. And so,
of course.
As it funneled down towards the end, a lot of it became about, okay, you have this memory from 1947. Thank goodness you have a close friend who is still completely with it and also was there that day in Elizabeth, New Jersey in, fourth grade. Let me go back to her and then back to you and back to her and try to figure out the truth of this. And you never fully get there, but you sort of approach it, with enough interviews, I think.
Also, don't they say, I don't know, I'm going to nerd out for a second, but every time you remember something, you're remembering a memory. So it's like a memory getting Xeroxed and Xeroxed and Xeroxed.
Yeah.
So
it's delicate, right? Because I think the science tells us that that's true, but as we all know from sort of fights with our spouses, we are 100% certain that our memories are correct at all times. And I feel that way. That's my own vanity and narcissism, and I think everyone feels that way. And I think that it's tricky because, now as it happens, Judy, I think, is a super ager. I mean, she's 88 and she's cognitively perfect.
Yeah.
And what was astonishing to me is how often these very specific memories checked out. And in fact, when she saw my manuscript and offered a bunch of corrections in the margins, sometimes she would say about something that happened in the 50s or 60s, well, actually, no, it was on the corner of 7th Avenue and 34th Street, not 35th, and she'd be right. And so that was a real gift to me as a biographer because she actually was this incredibly computer-like fact checker.
yeah. So you've written a lot of journalism, and do you feel like writing about Judy Blume, did the process feel the same, or did it feel different to you?
I mean, it felt like I thought it would feel very different. I definitely got over any sort of star-struck feelings very quickly. And
that was my next question.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I've been in this game long enough. I've written about enough people whom I had like seen on screens, for example, that, you know, you realize people are people and everyone is human and everyone has done things they're proud of and not proud of. And I'd written a lot of magazine profiles that lasted 4 or 5 pages, and newspaper pieces. You know, I after college, I kind of got my start in newspapers and magazines and so forth. So I'd written about hundreds or maybe thousands of people. I would say what was different this time was, number one, that I was doing it over several years. So I was given the sort of luxury of diving super, super deep. But the other thing was I had never written about anyone who had the fan base that she has. So you definitely feel, I mean, look, there's a very small group of people who are loved by millions and hated by nobody, right? Like Barack Obama's loved by millions, but he also, you know, politicians also have enemies, right? But then there are people who are loved by millions and then loved by more millions. It's like Oprah, Mother Teresa, Judy Blume. And maybe we could add a couple people to that list if we sat around and played a drinking game, but it's a pretty short list. And so one of the things I realized very early on in this process, as I told friends and acquaintances what I was working on, was I am dealing with the legacy of someone who is incredibly important and beloved to millions of people who feel that she is a sister, an aunt, a mother, a confessor. Like, I've never written about anyone like that before. So that's how it felt different.
Right. And I don't feel like she necessarily, I don't know that she necessarily signed up for that when she started writing, but I feel like she's definitely, she's definitely assumed that responsibility, and that can be kind of heavy. Yeah. I mean, speaking from someone who has a lot of memories attached to them, you know, I did a talk with Judy for her last book in San Francisco, and I was so starstruck. I mean, I became that little kid in 4th grade looking at the back of the book, looking at her picture, thinking, oh my goodness, I can't imagine if my mom looked like that, you know? I mean, my mom's beautiful and I love her, but like Judy Blume just seems so glamorous to me. And I think the first book that I read was the one that was the most autobiographical, the Sally J. Friedman as herself. So yeah, I can imagine it must have been a bit daunting to feel like you were responsible as a journalist in telling the truth and being respectful to her.
You know, do you know the podcast Song Exploder?
Yes.
Okay, so one of the things that's a great
Maybe
podcast.
you should explain it for the people that don't know it.
No, great idea. So the podcast Song Exploder is this brilliant podcast that you should all listen to, where the creator, whose name is Hrishikesh Hirway, takes one song and over half an hour, he layers the tracks on top of each other so you hear the creation of the song. In other words, he gets the artists to narrate how they developed the song, and they find the original studio track. So like, well, it started with a guitar lick, and he plays the guitar, and then they added a drum track, and then they added the lyrics on top, so you could hear it being built up in the studio to become the thing we know. And he does this with songs that are incredibly important to a lot of people, right? You know, to that song that you heard when you were 12. And he's somebody I know, actually. He was a few years behind me in college, and I would be utterly starstruck by him if I didn't know him already. But one time I said to him, I said, because he had done an episode on, I forget if it was a Fleetwood Mac song or a Crowded House song or something that just like brought me back to being 12. And I texted him and I said, you have to understand how much this overwhelmed me because I felt 12 again. And he wrote back and he said, right. He said, he was a few years younger than me. He said, that's like when I did this episode and I felt 12 again. And he said, there's no music like the music you hear when you're 12.
Yeah.
And I think that's like neurological also. It must have something to do with our stage of life and hormones and whatever. But there is something about Judy that's like, there's no author like the author you read when you're 12. And so, yes, the custodianship of that legacy was not only felt heavy to me as a journalist and writer, but also personally heavy because that was what I was reading then, you know?
Yeah, I don't really feel like, because Judy was so popular and because her audience, you know, we were kids and adolescents mostly, although, you know, she did write books for adults, most of her canon has been for young people. And I think maybe because of that, she hasn't really been taken seriously by the literary world. And so it was really nice for me to read a book that really acknowledges the incredible impact that she has.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe they might not be hugely complicated sentences, like it's not David Foster Wallace,
right.
but when you think about the impact that it had on people and how completely absorbed we were by these books. I mean, you could not pry a Judy Blume book out of my hands as a kid, really. And also I've read them to my kids,
too.
Did
you?
Yeah, yeah.
Did they like them?
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing, it's still...
I know.
It still brings down the house.
It's so classic. She's such a great comedian. I mean, those scenes are so funny.
Yeah, she's really fun to read out loud.
Yeah. No, I think that's true.
I mean, I didn't read forever to my kids. Let's I sort of, that's just on the bookshelf. They can find that one themselves.
Have you
I
read
don't
Wifey?
think anybody wants their mom reading them that book.
Have you read Wifey?
Of course I read Wifey.
See, I hadn't read Wifey till I started writing the book.
I read Wifey when I was doing Annie, and I was 10 years old, and all of the mothers, the mothers of all the orphans, that was going around. It was kind of around the same time, I think, as Fear of Flying. And, and so we all went to school together during the day and then performed at night. And of course, they didn't know that, all of the 10-year-olds, of course, were going to go and sneak, Wifey and read passages
So
out
all the
loud.
little orphans were swiping this copy of Annie.
Yes.
You were the most advanced orphans in...
Well, we didn't tell our parents
No, I
until
know.
later.
That's an amazing story. I mean, so I had not
And
read...
then I reread it when I interviewed Judy.
Did you?
I read it as an adult. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really fun.
Well, I realized you weren't asking me about Wifey, which I think is a novel that holds up, and I could talk about why I think it's an underappreciated adult novel.
Well, why don't you talk about it?
Yeah, I will. I was just thinking about what I read to my kids. Well, I did want to make a point, though. You were talking about how it might not be David Foster Wallace, but here's the thing. If David Foster Wallace or, Philip Roth or Ann Beatty or Robertson Davies or whoever tried to write a Judy Blume book, they wouldn't be, it's a different talent, and it's just as real a talent. And I think that's an important thing to remember, is that, writing for children is not easier. It's hard in a different way. So that was interesting. And of course, Judy... Look, we all have imposter syndrome. That's just like the human condition.
Yeah, I'm really suspicious of people who do not have imposter syndrome.
I mean, right. Right, they're probably bad at whatever they think they're good at.
Of
Yeah. So Judy had imposter syndrome. Well, I don't know that she had imposter syndrome. I don't ever want to put words in her mouth. She definitely wanted to tackle adult novels. And probably part of the impetus was, I think part of it was to flex a different creative muscle, but part of it was that's where the real writers play, And by the way, she was always friends with real writers and taken seriously by them. I mean, she was friendly with Robert Stone and Alison Lurie and all of these great adult novelists. So then she sets out to write Wifey. And yes, she definitely had Fear of Flying in her ear, and it's the late 70s, and there's been a decade of these great books about women's sexual liberation. And her people, her editors, agents, whatever, some of the people in her world said, you can't do this book because it'll destroy your children's career. It's too smutty. And some people were trying to tell her you have to publish under a pen name. And in fact, there was a scene she had to take out because the publisher of the head publisher of the publishing house said, my granddaughter reads you. I can't put this book out. What if my granddaughter picks it up, seeing your name on the cover? So there was a lot of tutting about morality around Wifey, and nevertheless, I mean, in some ways that was the hardest thing she ever did, was forging ahead into adult fiction, knowing that she had this kind of reputation to uphold. Because when she started, back in the days of Iggy's House and Margaret, she had nothing to lose. She was an unknown who was just trying to do her best. But flash forward 8 or 9 years, and she sold millions of books, and she's a hero to children, and now she's going to scandalize their moms. And that took some real intestinal fortitude, I think.
Yeah, I've never got the feeling that Judy necessarily set out to be what she became. I think she really just wanted to write books, and it was also something that she did for herself because she was in a stifling marriage and felt and she was a creative person, and so she tried a bunch of different creative outlets that didn't quite stick, and then when she got to this one, it just, she just flew.
Yeah, she had been she married while still a college undergraduate and got pregnant shortly thereafter. and then didn't work while she was raising her young children, and then had these 2 kids in elementary school, and it was the late 60s, and she was absolutely feeling stifled. It was very much like the classic Betty Friedan, feminine mystique, feeling stifled at home. And her mother was not sympathetic. Her mother thought, well, your husband, he's a tall, dark, handsome Jewish lawyer, the Big Five. And like,
well, it's like we're on a safari.
Yeah.
Did you see the Big Five?
spotting the Big Five. And like, how do you first cheat on and then break up with a tall, dark, handsome Jewish lawyer like John Blume? And by the way, I'll preempt the question of whether Blume is a pen name. It was her first husband's last name. It's funny how often I encounter people who assume that she just thought it was a great name for a children's writer. It was Judy Blume.
Yeah.
And it is.
It is.
So no, but Judy Sussman married John Blume, and then there she is, 10 years later or more actually, and feeling like she needs a creative outlet. And what's so interesting is she'd never been a writer. She had played piano, she had danced, she'd always been a kind of exuberant and creative child, but it was not like she had these sort of novels in a drawer somewhere or these poems that she'd written as a kid. And writing was not the first thing she tried. She tried songwriting, and she tried doing visual art, felt art.
Felt art, which she actually got Bloomingdale's to carry.
Right? I mean, she was cutting out these pieces of felt and gluing them to canvas backing and making these things that you might buy for like a newborn's nursery that have their name and right? And she puts on her best mod suit and heels and gets a Vidal Sassoon haircut and goes into the city from New Jersey and goes to Bloomingdale, says, I'd like to meet the children's buyer. And they say, okay, we don't know who this lady is, but go up to the 6th floor. And she goes up there with her portfolio and leaves with a deal that they'll sell these things on consignment. And so the thinking was she would be a visual artist for children. And then after 6 months, she was allergic to the glue. She was breaking out in hives and kind of realized this is not for me. And only then does she sign up for this adult continuing ed class in writing for children. And like the rest is history,
Yeah, she's pretty remarkable. I've always gotten the feeling that Judy is, she's an extroverted person, but writes incredibly, not introverted, but interior books.
Yeah.
That are exactly what people our age were feeling. And I just don't know that anybody else has done that. Who do you think, if there's a Judy Blume writing today that has that kind of impact? I don't even know if books have that. I'm in a library, but
Right.
with everything else, do books have the same impact of the next generations that they did when we were growing up?
We have kids about the same age, and I'm curious, like we were talking about it backstage, and our kids are readers, but I think it's probably one medium among many in a way that for a lot of kids, in a way that for us, it was kind of like this everything. And in part, because of that interiority. I think that, I was struck when I went back to reread all of her stuff. That's a lie. Reread a lot of her stuff, skim. No, I ended up reading everything, but some of it I was reading for the first time, and some I really, was rereading for the 20th. The opening passage of Margaret is like literally her prayer. She's on her knees saying, "Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret." And I was reading that for the first time in probably 30 years, and I teared up. I thought, this is so moving. This girl doesn't know, her parents have moved her to New Jersey, right? She comes home from summer camp and finds out her parents have sold the apartment in New York and are moving her to the far reaches of New Jersey, 20 miles away, but like for a city girl, this might as well be, the boonies. And she's there on the first or second night in her new house and is completely alone and has these feelings and has never been religious, but decides, well, I have no one to listen to me, so I'll talk to God. And it just struck me how beautiful that was and how profound. And from that moment on, in her children's books, Judy almost always wrote in the first person. It was always this almost diaristic thing. And I think you're right.
I always think of Judy in the first person, but she must have written...
Sally was third person, Sally J. Friedman, and the adult novels. But basically everything else was first person. Deanie, Blubber,
That's how much I love her books, is that I don't
Yeah.
even know which tense they're in.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? To me, they're just all first person because
Yeah.
they were just so immediate.
Yeah. And to your question about like who else is doing that today, I mean, part of what happened was she made the world so receptive to children's literature that there's been this explosion of it. So there's never going to be one person the way that she was kind of like
Yeah.
this special thing. I mean, there were other great children's writers then, but someone like S.E. Hinton, The Outsiders was those were amazing books.
Yeah.
But they, like, to use your word, they weren't interior in that way, I think.
Yeah, I did love those books, but not the same as
Yeah.
Judy. And I also started reading Judy's books younger.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, really, I think fourth grade, fourth grade, I think I discovered her. And then once I started, no matter what, I would, no matter what she wrote, I would read it.
Did you have favorites?
Well, Sally J. Friedman, that was my first one. I didn't know who Esther Williams was. You know, that's how I learned about Esther Williams, and it had the old Hollywood, and I remember the cover that I had this little girl, and she had a flower in her hair. I mean, just everything. I was a California girl. I'd never been out of California. So, you know, learning about New York and then Florida, it was like, you know, it was a different world, but I felt like I knew about it because, you know, through her. Yeah. And also everything that I was feeling was the same thing that she was feeling in a different time, you know, in the 40s.
It reminds me of the people who would say, like, so Seinfeld's the most popular show in America. What must people in Iowa think about New York City, right? Like the way so much art, I mean, I'm from New England, and I was born in New York City. It did occur to me at some point, the rest of the country gets a lot of art that's set in the Northeast.
Yeah.
Like, you must think it's all New York all the time. And of course,
yeah.
You know,
well, I always
not.
felt like I belonged on the East Coast.
Yeah.
You know, but mostly because of Santa Claus and the chimney. You know, we
Right.
didn't have a chimney in our house, and I just wanted to get to somewhere that had
We
a
had
chimney.
actual snow. Yeah, I mean, I think that her books were, I too started reading them around fourth grade. And they were the things that I would sort of clutch fiercely. Like I read other stuff around the periphery of them, and I too, not sure I can name one favorite, though when people ask me which I think her best book is, I do say starring Sally J. Friedman as herself. And I'm amazed it hasn't been made into a movie.
Same.
I think, like, Margaret is great. That's a great role. Abby Fortson. Who here has seen the movie Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret? Yeah, but like, you all should. It's a great movie.
I'm surprised it took so long to make that into a movie.
Well, it's because she wouldn't give the rights to anyone.
Yeah.
She was so protective of Margaret as a character so Forever was made into a
TV movie, right?
Yeah, I was about to say a bad TV movie, but that might. It was Stephanie Zimbalist and somebody in like 1979. Have you seen? I haven't seen it.
No, I haven't seen it.
You can find snatches of it on YouTube of the Forever movie. Fudge was made into first a live action series, then an animated. Like, some of her stuff had gotten made, sort of. But Margaret, she wouldn't sell the rights until finally Kelly Craig and James L. Brooks came to her, and she just trusted that team. There were a lot of efforts to make Deanie. In her archives, you just see script after script of good screenwriters. The woman who did Secretary, which is like one of the best scripts ever, tried, and Judy had basically ultimately fizzled. So there were attempts to make other works of hers into movies, and that was a great frustration, I think, for a lot of people that more of her stuff wasn't filmed. But there was never an attempt to make Sally J. Friedman, and I think this is the one. This is like what should be done.
Well, any filmmakers
right,
out there?
here you go. Here's your assignment.
Putting that in your ear. What surprised you the most when you were done working on when you finally got going on the book? Really,
Yeah.
What surprised you? Was there anything that really surprised you?
I think, I didn't go in with a lot of preconceptions. Again, I had met her once, but only once when I finally started writing the biography. I obviously had read lots of profiles of her, but they tended to go over the same material. And so I was kind of a blank slate when it came to Judith Marcia Sussman Blume. And that was a kind of a thrill to be learning a lot. So a lot of what I learned was new. I mean, I didn't know about the second husband. She had this fairly long marriage to John Blume and 2 children, and then divorced him in the 70s, and then very quickly took up with this man she'd met on an airplane, who turned out to be a pretty bad dude. And she followed him.
A bad guy. I mean, a bad guy for her.
For
I mean,
her.
there was,
Yeah. But also, I mean, Yes, a bad guy for her, and he sounded a bit like a kind of selfish, preening guy. But again, I never met him, and he has 2 daughters who I think well of him, and he ended up I spoke to his 4th wife, and the one who survived him, who thought he was a lovely guy. And so Tom Kitchens may be a lovely guy, and he died. I didn't have a chance to interview him. But that period in the 70s where she remarried very quickly, and in a marriage that she quickly decided was mistaken, and moved her children 4 times in 2 years or 5 times in 2 years, and kind of was a mess in between the first marriage and finding real stability with George Cooper. You wouldn't have known anything about that from reading profiles of her. She didn't talk about it.
Yeah, I think that, it makes sense that she didn't talk about it. It wasn't really a very long relationship, and she has been married to George for so long, and they are such a great couple. I mean, they're so tight, and
Did you meet George when you were?
I did, of course.
George is always with her.
Yeah, they're always together.
Yeah. And they clearly are. They adore each other. I mean, it's.
And they run a bookstore together.
They run a bookstore together in Key West. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Judy's in the bookstore several days a week. And one of the questions I often get asked is, well, which days is she there? And okay, I'm flying to Key West. Do I go on a Tuesday? And the answer is I don't know that she keeps such regular days that we can promise. But she is off. If she's in Key West, she's in the bookstore. She works on the window displays. She works on the buying. She's really in the what are they stocking? She's deep in it.
Yeah, well, she's always, I think, been passionate about books and fighting against banned books, because her books are still one of the most banned books, right?
Right, which is a testament to the fact that they're widely read.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, there's no greater way to get kids to read books than to ban them. I mean, are they ever going to get that?
Right.
Really?
Right. No, I mean, that's right. And I think, and today, of course, even when books are pulled off a library shelf because of some politician, getting a notion, fortunately there are lots of bookstores that are accessible. There's online ordering. I think that there are fewer book deserts than there used to be in terms of kids who really can't find something they want. But we shouldn't underestimate how troubling it is that librarians and teachers, who are our first emissaries of literature after parents to young people, are often having their livelihoods threatened.
That's right.
For stalking Judy Blume.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she's been a real activist over the years, and it was really nice to read all of that.
Always active from the very start. The first time she heard about a school that wouldn't stalk Margaret, she was, I don't remember if she was literally on the phone or writing a letter or whatever, but she never took it sitting down. And she was always there for other authors. She testified in a trial in Denver, an obscenity trial, when the owner of a bookstore there, an independent bookstore, was being prosecuted for something that they had stocked. One of the most moving things to see, and I think will be moving for you to read about if you read the book, is how much of the busy work she did. It's not just that she lent her name to I'm on the honorary committee. When she was working with the National Coalition Against Censorship, she was handwriting notes to fellow writers, to Stephen King and to, you name it. She was pulling in Stephen King, she was pulling in Salman Rushdie, she was pulling them, saying you have to be at this benefit. Love Judy. You have to join this committee with me, or you haven't, she was really kind of holding, I don't mean to pick on those writers who were also in the fight, but there are other famous writers who I think their feet had to be held to the fire a little bit to be told this is a very important, eventually they'll come for you too. And we owe it to the writers who don't have our platform to speak up for them. And she was just always first among equals doing that labor, really.
Why do you think, I know what I think, but why do you think adults were so frightened by the books? What do you think they found the most threatening? Was it the sexuality? Was it the religion, or the character in Margaret is sort of a little agnostic.
She's on a quest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think they were frightened by all of that. Of course, a lot of the ones who pretended to be the most frightened hadn't read the books, right? We've all seen that quote of well, I'm not going to read this filth, but it should be banned. So there was always that group. You know, there's a great clip you can find online where she's debating the American right-wing Pat Buchanan, on Crossfire, the old CNN show, and he's asking her this and this, and she finally said, and it's pretty clear he hasn't read the books, and she says, look, Deanie is not a book about masturbation, and by the way, why, Pat Buchanan, are you so hung up on masturbation? And she just completely turns the tables on it. Just the look on his face alone is priceless. So I think that there are people who just thought these books are too frank. But again, she wasn't the only person or even the first to be doing that. She was just the lightning rod because she was so popular. But it occurs to me just now that I also think one of the things going on is if you were a parent who maybe was concerned that you weren't connecting with your child and they were connecting with Judy, maybe there was a bit of competition there almost. I mean, Judy, you know, her one nonfiction book was this collection of letters from children at one point she was getting 2,000 letters a month, largely from children, and they would often take the form of, Dear Judy, or Dear Miss Blume, Dear Mrs. Blume, I have a problem and I can't talk to my mom about it. This thing is happening and my dad wouldn't understand. And so she was a replacement mother for a lot of kids. And I now wonder, just sitting here, it occurred to me, I wonder if that was part of it, if the fact that she was being put into this role as a kind of surrogate mother was threatening to a lot of people.
Could have been, and I don't know what it is about our country, or the U.S., let's say, I'm not going to speak for Canada, but that has such a hang-up teaching kids about sex. I mean, isn't this something that kids are supposed to learn about?
Right.
Aren't they supposed to learn about their own bodies? But there is an incredible aversion, it seems, to that. And I thought that we were done with that. I thought that I was going to be able to say, oh, that was just my generation, and now it seems like it's
always back.
And they're always going to learn about it. But if they don't learn about it in a healthy way, they're going to learn about it in a different way online. We're almost out of time. Yeah. This has flown by really fast. So before we go to the audience, I would just like to ask you what you hope people get out of this book.
Well, the first thing I hope they get out of this book is just joy. I think it's her life. You know, she's 88 years old. She really has lived an American century. And I always tell people, to learn about Judy is to learn about someone who was born not in the 40s or 50s. She's not the Woodstock generation. Like, she was born in 1938. She remembers when World War II ended. Okay, she was the mother of 2 children by the time Kennedy was shot. She is really of a generation that is leaving us, and to read about her life and how it was changed by a fairly late encounter with feminism and the career she built with very little support from her husband, with no peers, with no connections in the industry, and then becoming this sort of grand figure in American arts and letters is just a kind of extraordinary thing. So I think what I would say is I hope people read it not just for the story of Judy Sussman, but really for the story of how America has changed in ways that made her career possible.
Well, I think that is great, and I think everybody should buy this book.
Oh, thank you. Or the audiobook.
Or the audiobook.
Which is amazing.
And thank you all for coming.